Good afternoon. I think then we should get started. Welcome to the Annual BPI Lecture 2025. Daryl, I thought when we'll get this people rejuvenated in the new year, in the month of February, the month of love. Therefore, one will assume that we'll extend that love through our body language, also non-verbal communication. The theme or the topic of the lecture, I hope that my pronunciation will be proper today. Whither a democratic dividend or democratic disaster, what is to be done? When I read the invitation, the immediate caption in my mind was a poem. And when reading that poem, the immediate caption was also extended when I read the abstract. I further extended this caption to poetic justice when you read the abstract by Justice Salbi Sak. I don't know what's the pronunciation, VC. I've been struggling with this pronunciation. But then I consoled myself. I said, I'm not sure on the pronunciation, but my aunt once told me when she was in class, her teacher, I think they were in grade 4, 5 then. Her teacher wanted to introduce them to a musician known Masikela. So the teacher introduced the name of Masikela, pronouncing it as Huch Masikela. And therefore, I guess that pronunciation in that context is relative. So as we begin the program this evening, I'm going to invite to the podium the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Professor Nthabiseng. This is the biggest university in the continent in terms of size and shape. We've just below 1.2 million alumni. 370,000 students per annum, 1 million students applying every semester, wanting to study with the university. As we welcome Professor Nthabiseng.
Thank you very much, Professor Snoqualmie. Oftentimes we forget to introduce the program directors. Professor Snoqualmie is an associate professor of ethics, an expert on systematics, but also is the current executive director of the university marketing and communication. So let me thank him before he starts his responsibility. He has already invited us to literary studies, to politics, to imagining the theme that you're bringing to the fore on democracy, Daryl Lehohla. But I also heard him impel on us an idea. I thought you'd have affirmed it. He says, love is the foundation of philosophy and imagining the future. And I didn't hear anybody nod. Perhaps because scholarship has become functional and sometimes devoid of these ideas and philosophies that require us to be attentive as we serve society. So if government was a government of love, what would it be about? And if democracy was anchored by love, what policy decisions would we undertake? I think the conversation between philosophy, public affairs, public administration, and politics is quite important. We forget philosophy in discourse analysis when we think about government, governance, and as well democracy. So colleagues, let me recognize yourself, Professor Swanepoel, the program director. Sorry, colleagues, I need an inventor of multifocal lenses. I apologize. Let me recognize Professor Lakima Tebula, the chairperson of the board of the Pool of Ideas Foundation, Dr. Pali Lehohla, the former Statistician-General and a lecturer for this annual BPI Foundation lecture, and a great friend of the University of South Africa. Let me acknowledge the moderator, Mr. Mike Siluma, the deputy editor of Sunday Times. It's funny you're here, but we are quite appreciative of your presence. Sunday Times is a welcome accompanier in reflecting on discourses on society. So can I request that you give him a round of applause? I think it's a matter of love and courage to be at UNISA, Mr. Siluma, and we are quite happy that you have had that courage to be here. You know why, so we'll talk. Then let me acknowledge Professor T. Eloff, Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, Mr. Daryl Swanepoel, Dr. Kefiloe Masiteng, the former deputy statistician. We only know you in multilateral systems, and we often forget that you crunch the numbers. So thank you very much, Dr. Masiteng, for being here. Dr. Miranda Muloto of the BPI Foundation, senior officials and executives from government, business, and university sector, members of the diplomatic corps, fellow UNISANs, academics, students, staff of the university. I also recognize colleagues from Tshwane University of Technology, Northwest University, and other universities. I know that they are present, hence I'm naming those universities. Good afternoon. I am truly honored and privileged to be here to welcome you to the University of South Africa as UNISA, to the University of South Africa. As UNISA, we welcome the BPI Foundation, its leadership and associates, and hope that the lecture will nourish and stimulate more ideas and debates about the past, the present, and the future of South Africa and the African continent as a whole. We do so understanding that the reflections on knowledge, on analyzing the past, the present, and the imagination of the future is not something that is done in a linear process, but as we would have stated, is a multidisciplinary engagement that anchors not only the numbers, but the quality of the policy systems, the ideologies or ideas that anchor them, as well as the practicalization, if we would dare say, the praxis of leadership in enhancing democracy. The idea of South Africa and the idea of debating the state of South African democracy will always be important in the public discourse. And we hope that as an African university shaping futures in the service of humanity, we can add value as a platform through which such dialogues, discussions, contestations, and reimagination or co-construction of new ideas will find space and will be harnessed. Writing about the mid-19th century France in 1852, in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, the period of the transition between the Second French Empire and the Second French Republic, Karl Marx had the following to say about the appearance of facts and personalities in history. And he refers to Hegel, if you remember the dialectic theorization and the contestation between the idea, the synthesis, and the contestation. He says, Hegel remarks somewhere that all great world historic facts and personages appear, so to speak, twice. He forgot to add the first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. So it's very important that since through the lens of political actors and observers of history, society has come to appreciate this profound observation by Marx to mean generally the history repeats itself. I'm not sure, Dr. Lehohla, you're the one who will be giving us a lecture. You'll help us to understand and discern whether some of these theories find expression within our context. But if I recall in the history, within the same time that Marx is making a commentary, in the context of Southern Africa, there were different contestations around the type of leaderships that our forebears would have wanted to form. Whether you think about Moshoeshoe, Mantatisi, Shaka, and others. How did they imagine the future and the ideas of protecting or creating governance? This could be the dialogical aspects of also drawing on those epochs which are quite central in the current presence. Looking at the history of democracy and efforts of national development in Africa, almost 8 decades after the defeat of formal colonialism, with all the ebbs and flows of the democratic dividend, and situating our democratic experience within the wider African context, is it possible that we see today is an appearance of facts and personages, so to speak? Twice, the first time as tragedy, and the second time as farce. And if we look at the democratic turmoil, or even crisis, if you like, characterized by the rise of the right-wing ideology and populism, whether in the Euro-America's context or even in our continent, what is the verdict that we can give about the thesis of the end of history and the last man? What does experience and data say about certain types of political systems and economic models that have governed the world in the past century? Whereas I often look at reality through the lens of optimism, I cannot but reflect on the weight of history on our own experiences of democracy as South Africans and indeed as Africans. One of the questions that linger on my mind is how the successes and the setbacks of democracy have also to do with the colonial legacy which we experience as neocolonialism in Africa today. And that I want to put as a question. And precisely because of this question, can we think of democracy as a universal concept and a practice to the extent that we can say one size fits all? Delivering the 2023 Founders Lecture under the theme Pan-Africanism, Revisiting and Reimagining, a renowned international peace and justice scholar, Professor Horace G. Campbell, enjoined us to think about 2 critical tasks of Africans. He speaks around self-definition and the emancipation of Africa's descendants worldwide. He also speaks about the support for the revitalization of Africa, thereby elaborating on the humanity of Africa's peoples, not only in the continent, but abroad. I think we know that what Professor Campbell was trying to say to us, and we know that even as he was trying to conscientize us to thinking about Africa not just as a geospatial horizon, but also with these experiences of being Africa global, whether from paleontology or whether from political systems and migrations. This invites us to imagine even more. I'm discussing the idea of free, democratic South Africa by situating it in the wider context of the project of emancipation and the unity of Africa, deliberately because I truly believe that democracy can only succeed if its true emancipation is to be realized. And that can only happen if we must do and undo just embodying knowledges around what we are told democracy is about. Even primary students know that democracy is people for the people and etc. But are we people for the people? Are our policies attentive to the ecological systems, the validity of empowering humanity to live with dignity? Are we just promoting facts and personages, or are we looking into the emancipatory project? What do we do about the Berlin case that Congo is also contending with, even in our relationship with Congo? So South Africa's democracy is not just for its own sake, but it also has tentacles that are entwined with the continent as it is in the global arena. So colleagues, as I welcome you to the University of South Africa, I thought before the key lecture is shared, for us to journey together, to think about the models, the ideas, the scholarship, and the centers of excellence that we need to recreate so that our democracy, sometimes without the economic dividend, is important to strengthen the economic transformation, the empowerment of youth and young adults, whom majority are wallowing in the streets without the requisite tools, policies, and opportunities for strengthening their participation. I also, as I welcome you to this University of Leaders, the university that has nurtured the 3 democratic leaders of this country and their contribution to the democratic project, equally that has been attentive to the economic transformation of our country and continent by ensuring that we nurture and develop the first Governor General, the one whose image or the one who signs our currency and therefore is always looking and out to protect our currency. It's quite important for us as the university to appreciate the role that science, the agenda for transformation, the discourse with the public sector, private sector, civil society, and multilateral systems become a horizon and a conversion point for our reflexivity. So welcome to UNISA, the home of leaders, the university committed to nurturing and shaping the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Lengabula, the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa. I always brag that, sometimes people can speak English, but English does not correspond with content. Sometimes you have content and you are lacking the lingua. It does happen. But in UNISA, we are gifted with a principal and vice chancellor who has all of the 2. Thank you very much, VC. And we once more want to thank you for having allowed that the Annual BPI Lecture 2025 is hosted within the premises of UNISA. UNISA operates on an open door policy, of course, not at the expense of denting and damaging the brand of the institution. But we invite communities, different stakeholders, to come and hold their activities within the institutions, of course, within the parameters of the existing policies of the institutions. We are going to move to the next speaker on the agenda, Prof. Lakima Tebula, who is the chairperson of the Foundation of BPI, board chair. Perhaps I should welcome him with a question, because the invitation and the topic of the event is in a question. So maybe to simplify it for everyone who's here as a guest, maybe I should ask a question of Albert Einstein. And I quote, "A question that sometimes drives me hazy Am I or are the others crazy? Sometimes when a question is posed, whether a democratic dividend or demographic disaster, what is to be done? Am I or the others crazy? As I welcome Prof. Mathebula.
Thank you, Program Director Moruti Snokwane. I did not know that Baruti would study question. I know pastors to be giving answers. I'll try to answer your question at the end of welcoming everybody. Let me write on all the protocols that the VC has so ably done for us. But let me acknowledge Nkosana Thobela, the founder, executive director of the BPI. He is here. Nkosana Thobela. Thank you. And it is very rare that you come to a conference and when you look into the audience, you see an old friend of your mom and you don't say anything. Dumela Mam Koto. This was a friend of my mom. Let me acknowledge the head of the African Peer Review Mechanism, Dr. Eddie Maloka, who is here with us. And let me also acknowledge our former ambassador to Sudan, General Yekela, who is also joining us today, accompanied by Dr. Telela Vika from Wits University. And I think I've read in the protocols and supplemented what the VC did. Thank you, VC. Let me express my gratitude to UNISA for being the inaugural host of the BPI Annual Lecture. And who knows, with good collaboration, nothing stops us and stops the BPI from making this a long-term arrangement. This is a very historic event that we started this lecture at UNISA. Thank you, VC Puleng, and thank you, Professor Snokwane, for the logistics. Let me thank Arena Media for anchoring the lecture as a media partner and for recommending Date Mike Siluma. We call him Bra Mike, an experienced journalist and editor in South Africa. Bra Mike is an institution of journalism in the subcontinent. He is as much a footnote in African journalism as he is an endnote. Thank you, Bra Mike, for being part of this historic beginning. We appreciate it. And if you know the BPI, you must ask yourself that, or you must start imagining that if we start our lecture by inviting Professor Pali Lehohla, and you have seen our award ceremonies, how they were going up, you can just imagine who is next in the next year to actually be our next lecture. Nkosana told me that he got a WhatsApp from Barack Obama. I don't know what was in the WhatsApp. If it can be reduced to measurables in Tate Lehohla, it competes with rhetoric. And that is what guided us to choose you as the first inaugural lecture, because we respect your respect for numbers. So because numbers remove rhetoric, we thought we should get you to be the inaugural lecture so that you determine the cadence of our lectures. The BPI, unapologetically, it's a middle-class project by South Africa's courageous middle class. We are not apologetic about that. We are a middle class, most of the members, and this is a project of making sure that this middle class has the right content to guide this country. Without a middle class, society tends to lose direction. It is designed to ensure that this democracy outlives us and the many other generations after us. We are not ready to outlive the democracy. We want the democracy to outlive us. And that's why the BPI was thought of. We are reclaiming our ideation position as citizens of a country which is home to 30% of the world's minerals reserves. This is a country that has 40% of the world's gold reserves. This is a country that has 90% of chromium and platinum resources. It's a country that removes a heart from one human being to the other. It's a country that converted coal to petrol. We are not an ordinary country. We are not ordinary. And the sooner we realize that, as South Africans, as the middle class, the better we can start to be positive about our society. We're a country that was able to produce a language that is a language of science and commerce, and that language is less than 150 years. And it is already competing with languages that have millennia. Nothing stops us to take isiZulu, Sepedi, Setswana, Xitsonga, Tshivenda, and all other languages to that level if we are serious about it. This is the country that we belong to. We are becoming a standard regarding using the rules-based global order. The fact that we were able to take Israel to the ICJ purely on the basis of what the law says. Let's take away the politics that are happening in the Middle East. We just said when we look at this thing, we see genocide, let the court prove us wrong. And if the court said we are wrong, because of our respect for the rule of law, we would have accepted that we are wrong. In as much as we expect everybody to accept that they were wrong when they said it's not a genocide. And this is a country. If you remember the lawyers that were there, we saw the sharp legal minds that were there. And that shows us that we're not a Popeye country. So those harassing Eastern DRC might find themselves in the ICJ for the less reported genocide that is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. South Africa will not leave them untouched if we find that there's genocide there. The BPI is a platform of engagement. It is an outlet for thought through ideas, both as a think tank and collaborating with other think tanks. It is supported by an advisory board. The executive director I introduced, the young Reverend Nkosana Thobela, and a team of committed volunteers like Keke Mukotong and many others that I don't have the time to call. BPI hosts the Iconic Excellence Award VC and this annual lecture series in 2025. There will be a minimum of 4 seminars this year on various topical areas supportive of South Africa's strategic affairs, including the G20 hosting. We're prepared to collaborate with UNISA if UNISA has appetite. Let me thank you for coming. The order of the day doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Bra Mike, who will be ably supported by the brains we have here. And Dr. Theuns Eloff, I'm going to say it in the language that you'll be very excited. Is 'n omvang van Suid-Afrika se toekoms en is 'n begrip van die mag wat lê in 'n dialoog is vir my altyd buite beurt. Ke leboha ntate Pali Lehohla ka dipalopalo tsa hae ho tlisa nnete pepeneneng. Pali Lehohla o nka dipalopalo a tlisa nnete pepeneneng. Your legacy will always be that of making numbers to talk. Those that don't listen to you, they have themselves to blame. Bomme Nthabiseng Moleko le Kefiloe Masiteng, re leboha your ability to show us that until it has landed on the Mbogoto, we can't eat. It's about Mbogoto, you know? And let me also thank Dr. Swanepoel for agreeing to our invite, and we're happy that you came. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let these broadly pulled ideas blossom. We're waiting to hear Ntate Lehohla, and we're waiting for you with questions. Please allow me to transfer your question to Ntate Lehohla. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Matebula. I couldn't comment on the speech of the Principal and Vice Chancellor because of the English that she was using. But at least for you, I can try to say something, accompanying your message. The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. These were the words of Winston Churchill. That 5 minutes is critical because it speaks to the experiences of the ordinary voter, immediate experiences on how they understand and interpret democracy, whether it works or it does not work for them. That's why they say that that 5 minutes is critical as the best argument to make a determination whether democracy works or not. As we move to the next item of the agenda, because we are moving behind schedule, we are going to invite the main speaker of the day. And I don't think he needs any introduction, except to say that Daryl is a former Statistician-General, the Republic of South Africa. Daryl, every time I think of you, I imagine parables. And Nietzsche says this about parables. On every parable, you write to the truth. Unquote. It's very interesting that when you also read what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross states, and I quote before I make it relevant to our context. According to my parents, I was supposed to have been a nice, church-going Swiss housewife. Instead, I ended up an opinionated psychiatrist, author, and a lecturer in the American Southwest who communicates with spirits from a world that I believe is far more loving and glorious than our own, unquote. In short, what Elizabeth is doing, she equates the university with the world of spirits and says that it is loving and glorious than our own world. I hope that by answering the question, whether a democratic dividend or a demographic disaster, what is to be done, we shall appreciate the other world of spirits. Thank you very much.
When I called, it was under strict instructions from the editor. And I called and you answered and it happened and we are here. Vice Chancellor, Professor Lenkabula, Dade Matebula, chair of BPI. My co-presenters, Nthabiseng Moleko and Kefiloe Masiteng, and the other two co-presenters, and the moderator, Daryl Siluma. I am presenting on some topic that, as Daryl Siluma characterizes it, I probably have to say maybe I should change the topic. But now it's too late because my presentation has captured it that way. Because I might prove to be fairly inadequate in managing it. If I could have the screen up instead of the red, I happen to have addressed the EFF. And I came with the reds a bit. Professor Moleko, your book is part of what inspired me to think about either a democratic dividend or a democratic disaster. When the Calabash Awards were given by the Chancellor, President Beki, he had invited Justice Albie Sachs. And Albie Sachs said something very profound, that in his intervention, that we have the country, but do we have the society? And I thought that I should elaborate and follow this a little bit to ask the question, whether a democratic dividend or a demographic disaster. I try to explore the nexus of democracy and demography and pathways towards how those two can converge and probably deliver the dreams of the RDP. My former office, in the course of thinking that way, then released the IES of 2022, Income and Expenditure Survey. I was crossing my fingers that that data point will be available. And when it arrived, it released the tension that I had of speculation, in that at long last I could talk even to the current facts and say, what is the interpretation that I will assign and ascribe to these facts? Little did I know that there was no air conditioning here. And I thought that I should bring my own air conditioner. And part of my presentation is this air conditioner. Because in it, we are asking the question, what can drive the needle in South Africa and make it better? What is it that is significant and can make significant contribution to the poor? I'll end up with that. The release of the IES put me in a bit of a conundrum as I explored the numbers. Because in it, it revealed what Keynes advised Roosevelt to do. But in the same data, we see Milton Friedman. In the end, you actually don't have Keynes nor Milton Friedman. And this is where the weakness of our policy designs are. That we wallow through life without a clear path of where we are going. And that contradiction of Keynes and Milton Friedman has landed us in this chaos that we have. My laptop is asking whether I can see the pictures. So what is the outline? I actually think that we have an enduring legacy of Verwoerd. And I explore the evidence from the 2022-2023 Income and Expenditure Survey, how the data reinforces the practices of Verwoerd, and how do we undo the mental shackles from a systems thinking and systems design point of view, and what can we do around the greatness of the future, which is here, and energy systems of the future, and lift the poor out of poverty. The enduring legacy of Verwoerd starts with a vote in 1953 in the parliament of the country on the 23rd of September, when he said, what is the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't do it in practice? We haven't resolved that legacy, because even now the president, the minister of education, the MECs of education, the principals of high schools, the parents, the children, all run into this madness of ensuring that Verwoerd is alive and well in his grave. That we run away from mathematics because we want those indicators that make schools show that they are progressing on nothingness. You see, when Verwoerd said in 1953, what's the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't use it in practice? Here you see the Indians, the blacks, Africans, and the colors, all huddled together like bananas in the dark. And you see the whites up there. And when Verwoerd said, what's the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't use it in practice? You see the Indians actually taking a different route, altogether a different route. And what you see in the income and expenditure survey, a number of years later, it is that departure that the Indians deliberately followed. And when you look at that chart there, you can see the acquisition of higher education by the whites against the blacks. The proportion of those with degrees amongst whites, it's almost like the proportion that you'll find in Korea. Around the blacks, this is the thin proportion that you get. And this is 80% of the population. You can't run a country with this kind of thing. Not that skill. In 100 years, in 1,000 years. And that pattern is not changing up to today. And is reinforced by saying, what's the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't use it in practice? And therefore we go for mass literacy. Transitioning from there into university, there is an issue around intergenerational value. If the graph goes up that way, there is intergenerational value. If the graph is going down that way, it means it's disaster. And therefore, there we see amongst blacks and coloreds that generational disaster, demographic disaster. And amongst Indians, you can see they'll be catching soon with the whites. I did the same analysis for census 2022, and you see the patterns actually similar. And you see whites there, Indians there, blacks and coloreds hovering downwards in terms of progression ratios. This cannot deliver this country out of disaster. Now you see, even now you see those dogs barking at each other. The gate is open. And that's where we are trapped. We cannot go over that gate. This is where we are. And even the elephant, once it's released, it still thinks it's tied. And the elephant in the income and expenditure survey is so palpable. The evidence is so palpable. Here we find that the income and expenditure survey that the Statistician-General released on the 28th of January, I hope a lot of you looked at that. And I hope it is hope and true. And it gives you average annual household consumption as well as the median. What is more important is the reinforcing practices. Here I saw Keynes, and yet I also saw Milton Friedman. For the first time, the black consumption expenditure shares surpassed that of whites, 62%, from 41%. Rose to 62%, and that of whites dropped from 45% to 25%. On the back of, indeed, around 2022, around the SDR. What is it, SDR or SRD? the money that government gave for COVID to people. It rose that figure to 62%. And that means of the expenditure of 3 trillion, blacks had buying power of 1.8 trillion. The question is, what do blacks do with that income? And this is where the dog fights the other dog. And they don't want to meet, even if the gate is open. Now, this is a sad story. A real sad story of where blacks actually buy and spend their money. You see, in South Africa, and I have all African countries here. In South Africa, we have large shops, medium and small shops, specialized shops, private service providers, and public and semi-providers. And then we have these ones, the markets, where blacks and the foreigners fight. 1.28% and 1.57%. Here are the checkers, and all these other are owned by white. That's where the 1.8 trillion goes. And now this is where Keynes, in terms of ensuring that you make money available for consumption, works. But if on the other side, there's no industrialization, that money will go to these outlets for consumption and no industrialization by blacks. The question, therefore, whether a demographic dividend or a democratic dividend or a demographic disaster arises as a consequence of these consumption patterns. That a Keynesian accident, because it's not by design. If it was by design, government would have done this thing differently. Neither did they know about Milton Friedman, nor did they know about Keynes. Because if they understood Keynesian economics, they would have gone deep into industrialization as they make that money available and make blacks suddenly surpass consumption by whites. And then turn the tables in order to make the blacks begin to enjoy the benefits of democracy. This is just a table that shows the same figures. And here, of course, the middle class is suffering. And it has suffered all the time. And that's what the numbers show. In 2011, you can see that those with secondary and tertiary, those in 2015 and even today, in 2006 to 2023, the middle class is actually having a declining expenditure. And that is substantial. Some decreases are at 19%, and therefore there's absolutely no generational value. Now, the shares of income. You see, the top 10% that enjoys 50% of the income consists of 73% of whites, 40% of Indians, 20% of coloreds, and only 13% of blacks. That's where the 10%, the 50% is concentrated. The accommodated blacks, who constitute 13%, are there. They are accommodated. That includes us, the BPI. The bottom 40% only has 4%. And that is not changing. You can see from 2006 to 2023, that is not shifting. Now, you see, this is the money that government provides, pensions and so on. This part of the money that government provides, here, this 51% and 29% goes straight to these outlets and never go via industrialization. So you cannot see development. That money is not active developmental finance because our plans are based on Milton Friedman and not following through with Keynesian economics. So in a system of government that follows both Keynes and Milton Friedman at the same time, then we have a perfect Nthabiseng Moleko green Hosasa already. Yeah? Now, here is an interesting pattern for women. But this is the falsification of statistics at times. Across this time, women made the biggest gains across in terms of this income and expenditure side. However, it is based on low base. Low base effects exaggerate progress. And you have to understand that. However, there is also an issue around this progress that they have made. As of 1996, in the first census that we ran, I ran these tables to see percentage of women that actually complete degrees relative to men. You can see the gap was so huge here. That gap begins to close here by 2001, closes by 2011, and in the census of 2022, women overtake men. And that, as a consequence, you see this income that they get. Increasing incomes even across this time, although they started from a low base. So, what is it that the income and expenditure survey tells us? It tells us that real income per capita have been declining, especially in 2011 to 2015 and 2015 to 2023, significantly on the middle class. And that middle class is shrinking and dying. In fact, when you look at this expenditure patterns here, you can see how severe it has been in 2011 to 2015 and 2015 to 2023. So when you think about the government of national unity, and you think about the ANC with its rhetoric on Keynesian economics, and DA with its capitalist Milton economics, we have a combination of Keynes and Milton. In Lesotho, we used to have the BNP, which was doing this, showing peace. And then we had the BCP that had the Nobkiri. When they started marrying in the way that the ANC is marrying with the DA and the government of national unity, he said, my national aids are clock out. Now you can see the toy in blue. The hodgepodge of policies that are inconsistent is a worrying problem because it delivers these kinds of things. So you can see here, upper quintile, that's what the blacks have, accommodated blacks, against their counterparts here, 73% of whites. The Indians in 1953 moved, and that's why they're at 40.6. The question is, what are the blacks doing to move from that 13% to a more decent quintile in terms of incomes, in order that the democracy generates a dividend? At the moment, it doesn't. And the current policies are far from doing so. So, what you see here is average expenditure, average for blacks, and that is down here, and that's whites. This 67%, 67,000 goes into 350,000 by a big factor of 5. The levels of inequality are just alarming. And you see, now, here we see a decline in that income. You see 92,000 is what it was in 2015. It has dropped to 81,000 for blacks in 2022, according to the results of the Statistician-General. And income for whites has absolutely stretched out that way. So what is it then that we are seeing here? We can see that white income is 4.7 times that of African income. And in time, that white income by 2022 was 5.8 times, increasing the inequality. At the heart of this condition that continues to this day are policies that are toying in blue. So what does that mean in terms of skills? Why are we in this kind of dilemma? So I looked at the skills from 1994, the people that are employed in 1994 with some skills, and I look at that up to 2024. We are waiting for the report of the Statistician-General for 2024. The tail will be the same. So by 1994, the inequalities were known and were understood. With those with skills very, very low amongst blacks and coloreds, and amongst Indians and whites more reasonable. Over time, we see the blacks and coloreds staying almost the same. We go to 2020, we see the same thing. We go to 2021, it's not different. We go to 2022, it's not different. In 2022, you can see that the blacks and the coloreds here are trapped at about 17%, when these whites and the Indians are actually flying. That's the level of skill acquisition, amassing skills. But these two groups are only 10% of the population. These are 90% of the population, and they don't have the skills. And we hope that we can go forward. The democratic dividend is bound to reverse. It will not go forward. It shows in terms of the employment. As of 2008, 1.6 million young people aged 15 to 24 were employed, and here 4.8 million were employed. As of today, fewer, 1 million only are employed from 1.6, and here is 4.7 instead of 4.8 in a growing population. That means acceleration of a disaster. So I've shown you this in terms of skills. And we celebrate this 250,000 students, so many black students. The reality is not these absolute numbers. The reality of black performance relative to white performance. And Nick Spoll, I told him off. I said, Nick, you cannot present absolute numbers without denominators because they are false. The real performance of blacks is this one here, relative to that of whites up there. It is not this one. These absolute numbers are just good for politicians and nothing else. Now, here is the reality. The reality of progression into higher education. This is where blacks are, this is where coloreds are, and this is where Indians are moving, and they are surpassing whites. You see that blue and purple, and the blue and purple in whites, and that in blacks in tertiary education, and this litany of disaster in there, and amongst colors. This is disastrous. Well, demographic transition. Indeed a transition, but without a dividend in South Africa. In China and all these other countries where South Africa was a compatriot, and more likely in Latin America, blacks have not had that demographic dividend, although they have had a demographic transition of fewer children. I will talk about that for a long period. But here is where it is. China, with that transition, made sure that there is a dividend of 6.9% annually, whereas amongst South Africans, it's only 1%. I don't know what I'm doing up to time. But here is the reality. Income per capita is how you try to raise society. And that can be done through labor, productivity, that is productivity, through absorption rate in terms of trade. On all these three paths, we end up with a demographic dividend. But in South Africa, it cannot be, because those paths are not working. They are a combination of Keynes, a hodgepodge of Keynes and Milton Friedman policies, all in the same pot, and hoping that they'll deliver something to the nation. They will not. The inequality amongst blacks is the highest compared to that of whites. When blacks are that unequal, there cannot be peace when 80% of the population is so unequal. There cannot be peace in the country. And doing the mental shackles, Mwana Mhlomi, Vice Chancellor, says that he was at Godile. Mwana Mhlomi was the sage of Godile. He ran a leadership school in 1840, he trained Moshweshwe, he trained Skukuni. And he is, as Mark Dupree would say, the Aristotle of the Free State, of the Valley of the Free State. That's Moshweshwe. He says a responsible leader pursues peaceful and productive alliances, accommodates stakeholders, and uses new instruments of power to create intergenerational value. Do our politicians in South Africa today ascribe to this? If they did, what does the evidence say? He actually looked at a number of things that define transformational leadership. Peace, productivity, that creates intergenerational value, and integrated reporting. You go to government and ask, where is your system of planning? Masiteng, you used to put these files on top of each other. There's no system of planning in government. Absolutely none. I know that because I was there. I've seen it, I've critiqued it. It still is not there. Apartheid did better, and they had something that they tried to give to STSA, and I said, well, we are statisticians. Can you take this to the RDP? There was a man by the name of Pali there. His name was Pali. They had this system, which was a massive one, input and output tables, the SAM, and other things that they could do to model. We lost that possibility. So what do we owe each other? How am I doing for time that is open? I hope I'm not, because I promised Nthabiseng. You see, Monique Shafik says a number of things about what we owe each other. When we are young, we go to school. When we are getting older, we work. And then when we are at my age, we go on pension. But now the Minister of Finance says you should take a third of your pension and eat it when you are here. Will you go into pension? You can't. You'll fight over that with your children. And that is happening in many black families already. So what are these policies and what are they meant for? You see, systems design and systems thinking is very important at looking at what achievement means, what is the freedom to achieve, and what are the means to achieve. Following Amatia saying, I don't know whether we actually ask those questions in government and design policies that do that. Nthabiseng will talk about a lot about the pathways. Suffice to mention that at ADRS, we modeled and said it is possible to grow at 5%. And growing at 5% means a lot of policies have to change. And each of the policies is tabulated there and the contribution is given. And yet the government ignored all that. Particularly these macro reforms, which talk to Treasury and the Reserve Bank. This is where we see money being given out to help people in distress, but no industrialization happening. And that money then goes, that 1.8 trillion goes for consumptive capital without getting the benefits of industrialization. So this is the kind of country that we are in that really fails to think. So this is what happens. 62% of 3 trillion going straight to macro, going straight to all these other things. And then on top of that, you add a third of the pension so that you can go and eat magwinya and acha. So, what is this greatness of the future? I didn't cause the system of cooling not to work. I didn't know that it would not work. I didn't even know where you were going to sit by sunset. But you will soon immerse yourself in some interesting cooling. Let the air come straight into your face. This cooling system is a product that has been constructed by Mojalefa Murphy, a South African nuclear physicist who used to be at that place where we made bombs. He worked there. More recently, he came back and we met. Over the past 2 years, he's been working on this. This is Phuket. It cools without using HVAC. It just uses water and the motor. it cools to what is dew point. And dew point is that temperature where air condenses into moisture. And you don't need HVAC, you don't need a condenser, you don't need a refrigerant, you don't need a compressor, you don't need all those things. You just use these air. And I'm sure, Vice Chancellor, you are feeling the cool air where you are sitting. This is the seventh prototype that we have invented. And it works. Our view is this: we must disrupt the energy systems of the 20th century by introducing the 21st energy systems that are based on Newtonian laws of if there are two surfaces, one that is slightly cooler than the other, evaporation will occur. It is evaporative cooling, but not evaporative cooling to wet bulb, but towards dew point. And we are in the process of going towards refrigeration at no cost except God's given sun, because then we can even have a solar panel. With this technology, we can use our coal, we can use everything that we have, we can use our nuclear. This, we believe, should be centered around cooperatives. And the cooperatives must disrupt the expenditure patterns that we have witnessed over the last 30 years. It's about 17 people that have come together. We have put our money in that. We are looking at building cooperatives as a model, because manufacturing this is the way to go. It will de-risk Eskom's demand for energy, but it will also expand access to cooling. What are the statistics? 20% of energy consumption in South Africa is to cooling, and it's only for those who actually afford cooling. But we can expand cooling to every school, to every hospital, to every child, to everyone in the country. And it will cost very little and dramatically change the lives of people. Mujalefa's mother, on a deathbed, said, "Mujalefa, my son, nuclear physicist, what's the use of your education if you can't use it for resolving the problems of development?" And Mujalefa left Canada, where he could have sold this IP for millions and billions. He said, "This must be in South Africa." We have been working on this, and it has the potential of industrialization. The possibilities and versatility of this technology is vast, absolutely vast. In car cooling, in electric car cooling, in nuclear energy plant cooling, in cooling households, in food security. An Afrikaner who we work with said, "Don't think about these data centers. Think about food security." We see $61 billion rands being thrown away of food because of lack of cooling. And this is the solution. Thank you very much.
So VC, Nthabiseng Moleko says to me, I say, it's making noise, and he says to me, but yours is not working. Yeah. Yeah, no, there has been a report that they are, there was something trapped and they were working on it. I wanted to understand in simple terms what Nthabiseng Moleko was doing today. Because I sometimes don't mix statistics with politics, economics, social sciences. But then I came across a quotation by Carl Pearson, and it says that statistics is the grammar of science. So if anyone wants to understand what was happening during your presentation, they must understand that you're using the grammar of science to unlock, unpack, engage on issues that affect us as a society, politically, economically, and otherwise. And we appreciate your insights every time, Ntate Lehohla, that when you speak, there is sense. Of course, we might differ there and there with you, but what matters most is that you always bring fresh insights into discourse in trying to unpack and us to understand what is happening with our society. And in answering the question that was posed by BPI's own program, Whither, a democratic dividend or a demographic disaster, what is to be done. Ntate Nkosana Thobela, the ED of BPI, I think I've not acknowledged you. And I think that Prof. Matebula has been acknowledged multiple times, but I think it will be fitting that we acknowledge you officially so that people should not think that the program is on autopilot. There are leaders of BPI in our midst. And without wasting of time, I'm going to request the moderator of the next session for panel discussions or engagements, as I also acknowledged Prof. Eddie Maloka, the former CEO of APRM, African Peer Review Mechanism. I always tell him that he has the keys to Africa, to heads of states. And every time I see him, I also see wisdom. That VC, I always, when I meet him, I always tell him that we are going to meet with you and discuss our strategy moving into Africa. And for those who have been asking me about partnerships, there is a woman who's responsible for that by the name of Dr. Makhabani sitting there. She's the one who signs all the MOUs. If they make sense to her, they come to my office. If they don't make sense to her, they don't come to my office. So the program of BPI to go through her scrutiny, and she approved the program so that we are able to host this very interesting discussion today, conversation. As I call forward the deputy editor from Sunday Times to come and continue with the panel session, Ntate Mike Siluma. Thank you. Well, the VC is reminding me that there is a dean from the Thabo Mbeki school. Is it Thabo Mbeki alone? Because sometimes it has multiple names, and she's with Professor Mapoli from from KAES, College of Accounting Sciences. Agriculture, KAES, or not CAS, Agriculture, College of Agriculture. So, Prof, did they see you? Maybe just to wave? Both of, and this is Prof. Paswan, Edith Paswan. Thank you very much. As I call that day, Siluma to continue with the program.
For inviting me to, or rather for lumbering on my shoulders this task of trying to disentangle and hopefully give longer legs to presentation as Professor Lehohla. I have known Professor Lehohla for quite some time. I think when I first met him, I was editor of the Sowetan way back. And he was the States General of South Africa. And in those days, he still wore his yellow suits, that atrocious yellow outfit, which I think a lot of people noticed. And it was much later that we all got to understand the madness behind the yellow suit. For the first time in South Africa, we had someone in that office who was actively promoting the importance of making evidence and fact-based decision-making. And he has stayed the course, you know, even now. I thought that when he left office, he would go off and and ride horses and retire. But it is a course that he has stayed. And I think, Professor Lehohla, it is quite admirable. And I think there are very few people who are doing what you are doing, but not just doing it in the serenity of their offices. You know, there are many people who are doing research all over in the universities and elsewhere, but that research is almost as if it is made to go and sit in file 13. And most of us never get to hear about it. And I think that it's quite admirable that you're doing the academic and the research work, and you're actually championing it in public. You know, I mean, you probably are the researcher who features the most in the media, you know, on TV and everywhere else. Not because you're a superstar, but because of the substance that you bring to all the discussions about the problems that are facing our country. And by the way, just for that yellow outfit, I think you should have won many marketing awards. I think people were just not understanding you, you know. And as we all know, you know, Professor Lehohla, he probably is the most passionate intellectual in the country. Who intervenes with passion and often very aggressively. I think there are very few journalists who can stand toe-to-toe with you, Prof, when it comes to matters of research and the implications, you know, for where the country should be going. But listening to Professor Lehohla right now, one is moved to notice that the conversation is happening at UNISA, Melinka, in an environment, in an academic environment, which leads one to the next question, which is that of the role of intellectuals and the intelligentsia in South Africa, in transforming South Africa of today. There are many different perspectives of what ought to be the role of the intelligentsia. One would be that the intellectuals are there to tell truth to power, you know, which sounds very sexy, but it's not clear. And then do what after telling truth to power? The other one is of the school of thought that says that the intelligentsia should be, that its role is to influence and mobilize society with its ideas, presumably for the betterment of all. Which then leads one to ask, you know, what happens when the nexus, the link between the intellectuals and the general public is severed? And what is the purpose of the work that the intelligentsia and academics are doing if it does not impact society, if it is meant to stay in the echo chamber of the rarefied echo chamber of the elite and well, I nearly used a term that is favored by one of our political parties, which shall remain nameless, that the intellectuals are the leaders of society, you know. Now, if that nexus is severed, how does the intelligentsia lead and influence? Does it lead perhaps to a situation like what we have in the United States now, where despite prior warnings by the elite, the intellectuals, that the man who was wanting to become president would be bad for democracy, that is dangerous for democracy. He's going to break the tradition, you know, of how America has been governed. And in truth, he is living out what he had promised he was going to do. Now, what I'm asking is, where were the intellectuals and the intelligentsias in the United States? How does it happen that the intelligentsia warns society, talks about it every day, all the time, about the problem that is going to be befalling that society if Donald Trump becomes president, and the people go and give him a resounding victory. If we go to the United Kingdom, for example, they once had a prime minister called David Cameron, a very bright person, sensible, reasonable man, who got to a juncture in that country's history where there was a debate about whether the United Kingdom was better off staying in the European Union or leaving the European Union. And him and the intelligentsia, the majority of the intelligentsia in the UK thought that this was a no-brainer, you know, that the British people, you know, most of them ask, you know, I look at your numbers, Prof, about education, etc. You know, they probably looked at those numbers for the UK and thought, oh, people are learned, they're educated, you know, they're sensible people, and they understand what has been our role and the reasoning for belonging to the European Union. So he said, well, it's okay, you know, if there are people who are saying we should leave the European Union, let's put it to a referendum, you know. In the great old British tradition, the people will choose sensibly. Fast forward to today, the United Kingdom is out of the European Union, and the chickens are coming home to roost now as to what a bad choice it was that was made. But I'm mentioning these examples. Well, in South Africa, let's come to South Africa, and let me try and be controversial. I know Prof likes to be controversial, so he'll support me if I can. Whether you like former President Jacob Zuma or not, whether you like his policies or not, I think in the run-up to the election, many of the intelligentsia believed that MKP was not going to go anywhere, because in part, everyone knew that Jacob Zuma is not a fit, you know, for running South Africa, especially given what had happened in the past, you know. And despite the public sentiment among the intelligentsia, we got the results that we got in KZN and elsewhere, but in particular in KZN, that completely refashioned South African politics and probably will continue to impact on South African politics going forward. And then I ask again, you know, to say, how is it that the intelligentsia ends up thinking in one direction, which it believes is right, is progressive, that it modernizes society and does all those good things for humanity, and yet the people now and again will choose in the opposite direction. So I'm asking to say the presentation, for example, that Professor Lehohla has just made to us, which is very interesting, which is very important for all of us, you know, as South Africans to pay attention to. Many of the trends that are in the presentation are not unknown in South Africa. I mean, the broad trends, you know, for example, that Africans are the ones who are at the bottom of the pile, you know, as they have been in the past. And that white people and Indians are at the top, that, you know, colored people are somewhere in between. You know, sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, kind of thing. The question is, if our research, we have all this research in the country, because I'm sure Professor Lehohla is not hiding it under his bed or in his back garden or something. It is statistics which are released every year by, among others, Stats SA, which you Professor, were releasing these statistics for the longest time. But it does not look like there is a connection between the academic scientific work that is being done, that is availing the country, that is being made available to the country, and where the country is going and how the country is governed. And I think that for me, the question that I would like to table, I know it's not on the agenda anyway, but I think that it is a backdrop question that might help us to understand why our country is not making progress, why in many respects, over a period of time, we actually are regressing, we're moving backward. So I'm saying all the work that we are doing in our academic institutions, all the graduates that we're producing, all the money that as a people of South Africa are spending in that effort, how can we get to a point where it begins to benefit the country, actually, where we prioritize finding solutions for the country and get the fashionable term and get bang for our buck. I hate it myself, but I know that it's a popular. Professor Lehohla has given us much food for thought, but we have not been left to our devices to try and make sense of everything that he has said. We have assembled here a panel of 4 prominent South Africans whose expertise and experience spans economics, politics, sociology, health, and you know, you name it. So we thought that maybe we should ask them to help us to dig deeper and to help to understand more deeply the warning that Professor Lehohla is sounding for the country. I will ask them to come to the front.
Perhaps I should start by introducing the members of our panel. I've been advised to keep it cryptic. Like one line. Shall I start with Dr. Masiteng? Dr. Masiteng is the former head of Secretariat in the National Planning Commission and is currently working with the United Nations. I could go into more detail, but I've been advised to. Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, who's on my left here, is a development economist and senior lecturer at Stellenbosch, and she is the board chair of the National Empowerment Fund. Welcome again, Mr. Swanepoel. Thanks for joining us from a faraway place. Mr. Swanepoel is CEO of the Inclusive Society Institute. He has got a very wide experience in the world of business and teaching as well. I see here it says doctor, but I've heard people call you prof. Please correct me. You know, in journalism, some of the things we publish we can never take back. So we need to be very careful. We need to. Professor Eloff is an academic and a director of companies. He has been with our country's journey since, to my recollection, since 1994 in many different roles, having started out in theology, and then he went into academia, went into business, and he was very actively involved in around the CODESA process and the multi-party negotiations. I hope there are enough people in here who remember what the multi-party negotiations were and all of that. We thought we will start by asking our panelists in turn to give their response to the presentation by Pali Lehohla. I understand that Dr. Moleko has got a time pressure. Am I right? So we probably will start with her. Perhaps 3-4 minutes to give your impressions of the presentation by Professor Lehohla. I don't know if you want to be seated there or.
I think I'll just say all protocol observed. Thank you so much to the chair and also to the VC and to the program director. A very good day. I want to start with the point that has been made by the MC on why the dilapidation of society, where there's a divide between academia, what I call intellectuals, and also, I'd say, the policy process. I think that we have 26 universities. We have over 4,000 professors. If you go into associate professors in the different disciplines, South Africa is inundated with research and researchers. We've got NRF-rated researchers, and we've got a plethora of people that are very clever, that are very intelligent, that can help us solve some of the problems that we have. We are trying to debunk a lot of problems, but we actually have a lot of solutions. I think one of the issues is that the process of policy making and the process of generating knowledge has been made separate. The process of coming up with ideas and ideation and the issue of having problem statements, hypotheses that you're trying to resolve, and this, what we call budget process, which we're all going to be inundated with soon, doesn't necessarily have very close linkages to these thinkers. If you go to all the economics departments, you may find that we have, of the 26 universities, every one of them has an economics department. How many of the research findings, the PhDs, and the different papers that are published are actually finding expression in the budget policy process? I can tell you now, very few. So this is the problem, is that we have to strengthen, and this is what many governments and nations have done. And I'm going to refer to a solution because I think we can get inundated a lot of the time with the problems. We know the statistics. We know that we are in serious crises. I can show you even more stats that will put you in a very depressed state. You will leave this place. But I don't want to do that. What I want to do is give you some sign that we can get out of this. And it's a paper that I wrote with Prof. Swilling at Stellenbosch. I'm at the business school, and it's written New Wine into New Wine Skin. And what we're trying to do is to say, what are the alternative policy and reform mechanisms that we can put in place to get a different outcome? What are the measures that we put in place? Can we quantify them? We've done that through economic modeling and econometrics. I won't go into the detail. Hopefully the paper can be shared with your database. We also have said that if you don't do this, this is what will happen. We have projected that if we do what we call BUA, business as usual approach, and we don't change anything, we projected that unemployment will be at 38%. Guess what? Unemployment sits now at 41.9% as we stand. We projected that growth will be at 1.9%. Actually, let me go to the numbers. We projected that growth under business as usual will be sitting at a very constrained state where we see the indicator going down to 1.9. Guess what? MTBPS, the multi-budget policy process of National Treasury, caused growth and estimated downward revision to growth last year from 1.9, I think, to 1.4%. The numbers are, they're in my head, but if I'm a bit sketchy, it's definitely been revised downwards to close to 1. We were at 0 points the year before. You know, things are not looking good. We said that if we don't change the policy trajectory, we therefore will remain with the problems we have. There's a lot of graphs on the GDP to debt ratio, on exports and trade services, on the investment levels, and what will happen to GDP and average growth if you do things differently. And I want to spend a little bit of time on, I'm not surprised about where South Africa is. I must be honest. I'm not surprised that growth is at 1.4 projected now. And the outer 3 years on average, maybe 2.4, 1.9, 1.7. And I can tell you every time we have budget policy statements, what happens? Growth is revised downwards. Why? Because the policy and the policy framework and the policy environment is stagnant. It is not moving. So why do we expect different outcomes? It's, for me, that is the conundrum, is that unless we change the way the macroeconomic framework, our institutions, the management of our development finance institutions, if we are going to propose a thrust towards industrialization and industrial policy, there is no ways that just happens without deliberate state intervention, right? And so what I want to focus my last 2 minutes on is to say this can be done. You need a couple of fundamentals, and we outline this, and we also project what happens if you implement these fundamentals. There's 7 pillars that are non-negotiables for me if you are going to see a change. Industrialization has to be a key growth driver. Why? You've got an unemployment crisis. You've got a spatial development crisis. You've got an unequal, or the most unequal society in the world crisis. You also have a social issue where you now have gender-based violence and murder and crime and all the related social problems that we have and are experiencing, very much related to the lack of dignity of our people because they're not productive. Very much related to the lack of economic activity in our people because they're excluded. There's a director of inclusion. All the economic inclusion instruments haven't yielded the kind of results which we have wanted to see because they haven't had broad-based economic access. They've had limited or trickle-down effect on very few, and mainly the elite. So it's good that you have a broadening and an approach as BPI to look at the middle class and retaining the middle class. But the issue now is that the broad masses who are in the low income deciles are simply untouched by the economic growth and the economic, I'd say, expansion in South Africa, because we have an oligopolistic structure of an economy that the gains go to 4 or 5 firms in most economic sectors. Just a stat, on the turnover of revenue in most economic sectors, the turnover in most sectors in this country, we've spoken about the Gini inequality. You've heard it mentioned. Let me tell you about SMME inequality is worse than the Gini inequality when we talk about individual income inequality. Revenue in South Africa is condensed in most economic sectors, in your big firms, in your large firms, as shown by the former SG on his slide that shows that of the 1.8 trillion that South Africans have in the economy, 32% of those go to large firms. Even worse, if you look at the concentration in terms of how much share those big firms have in the total space in each sector, it's frightening. Even in the new industries of renewable, it's big firms that have up to 66 to 75%, if you measure what we call the HHI index, is frighteningly high. And so you've got to deconcentrate the economy. I think the 7 points I want to leave you with is that industrialization has got to be a non-negotiable. If we are to deal with unemployment, and if we are to deal with driving absorption and improving what we call the productivity, we have to have industrial activity in all the economic nodes, particularly those nodes that actually were economically repressed, what I call the economic wilderness. You've got to have labor absorbing strategies and target sectors that have labor absorption. This is a well-tested method. Have public employment programs beyond EPWP that are targeted and linked with university graduates and outputs of university. The HRD Council, or the former GIPSA Council, by the time you had the highest growth in South Africa, 2005, 6, 7, prior to the recession, it was because you had a program with the former President Mbeki where tightly linked to the growth strategy was the HRD strategy. Tightly linked to the growth strategy was what the industrial councils and the policymakers were saying need to be done, and they were executed in some form of a council. It doesn't help to have a plethora of councils, committees, and advisory bodies if the advice doesn't make room in the policy-making process. because they're just there to make a noise, to make announcements, but they actually do not make any impact when decisions are made, when budgets are allocated, and when decisions that are going to affect the livelihood of most people in this country are made. The third one, and I'll stop there and I'll encourage you to download this. It's called New Wine into New Wine Skin, and you put my name next to it, it'll be somewhere, but it is on the internet. Boost food production that is domestic and boost rural development. Unemployment and also poverty is an economic node where we have high level of rural areas, and poverty is there because there's very little economic activity. And it was like that by design. It's not by chance. It was designed like that. So unless you go and invest also economic infrastructure, but also the value chains of the economic sectors, particularly retail. There's a chapter where I disaggregate, the retail and the retail sectors, their concentration, but what needs to be done on transforming supply chain and also making sure that our people have an input into making sure that some of their household expenditure, they actually go back to them. That requires them to be part of the value chain. But if you're not talking about productivity and products, the chairs we're sitting on, the things we're drinking, the water, whatever, things you put in your hair, makeup that everyone uses, all these things that we're using day to day. Who is making these polystyrene cups, these paper, the plastic, all the things we use day to day? If our people are not given implements, even small scale manufacturing, using co-ops and also being given the necessary funding, we are going nowhere slowly. I think Chinua Achebe, who said that? Chinua Achebe. We're going nowhere slowly. But I think that the problem is that we have to aggregate at scale and massify at scale some of these things. I want to retract that if I'm quoting the wrong person, but I'm saying if we don't change the things, we are going nowhere slowly. So I want to say thank you. I was, by the way, Mike, I just want to say former NAF chairman. I'm not that anymore, but I have served my term so that you don't misquote and say, in the public domain, says the chairman. No, I'm speaking as an economist here, and that was my former role. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moleko. Maybe we hear from Mr. Swanepoel, who's been patiently connected to us from a faraway place. Mr. Swanepoel, can we hear from you then on your side, your response to the issues that Professor Lehohla raised? The specific ones, broadly speaking, that I picked up, related to the continuing income disparities. They related to education and a barely performing, with exclusion of UNISA, a barely performing, I think he was referring more to the basic education system, Prof, if I'm correct. A barely performing education system that is likely unsuited, to the needs of the country. And then the other one, which I also would be interested maybe to hear the views of the panelists, the money movement in the economy, because it looks to me like that is where the logjam is, that I cannot see how we can fight poverty, A, and B, grow the economy and industrialize if the money movements are the way that they are happening at the moment, when they are skewed largely towards consumption. Mr. Swanepoel, do you want to come in at this point?
Let's try to get this right. First of all, I would like to differ slightly with my previous panelist in where she said, we're going nowhere slowly. I think as a country we're going nowhere at quite a fast pace. But to the question, democratic dividend or demographic disaster, I would like to agree with Professor Lehohla by saying that the democratic dividend is definitely not there. we are facing a demographic disaster. And I'd like to refer to some research that we did at the Institute a couple of years ago, and where we said that if one looks at the population growth and the GDP growth, if you compare that, let's try this, and I hope it works better. If we look at the research results, we found that if we had a GDP growth of less than 2%, then by 2025, the unemployment would grow to around 37.6%. If we had a GDP growth of around 3%, that unemployment would still grow to about 31%. And if we have a GDP growth of around 4%, that unemployment would grow to around 26%. We know that this research was done 3 years ago, and we know that we haven't got anywhere close to the 2%, and therefore we are seeing the continued unemployment growth. And it should come as no surprise to any of us that unemployment is growing. And to me, there is really only one solution, and that solution is get the economy right. If we can do all the social engineering we like, and I agree with the social engineering, we need to deal with inequalities in the country. It's shocking that unemployment for the black South Africans are touching 40%, but for white South Africans, it's still only around 7%. If a truly equal society, if there was 42% unemployment amongst blacks, then it should be 42% unemployment amongst whites. And therefore, this inequality question really needs to be addressed. But it's not going to help by making white people poorer. What we need to do is social engineering by bringing more people into the economy. And the good thing is that since the white population is basically employed, full employment is 4%, we're running at around 7%. So if you were to grow the economy, who are the people that are going to benefit? The people that are going to benefit from it will obviously be the black South Africans. But the type of economic policies that we have applied in the country has simply been business as usual. And we need to move it towards, as the previous speakers have said, and as Professor Pali has said, we need to move it towards industrialization. We need to move it to agriculture, and it's not going to do that by employing big capital again, because big capital only benefits small amounts of the community. We need to do it through cooperatives, and that is what I liked about what Professor Pali put on the table today, is that we need to broaden the participation of the black community. Otherwise, you're simply going to concentrate the economy into the hands of a minority amount of black people, but that's still not going to filter through and broaden the economic viability of the middle class. So that is the number one point in the country that we need to focus on. The demographic dividend or demographic disaster, as Churchill, I think, said, democracy is the worst form of government, but for all the rest. So we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not a question of choosing between democracy and more autocratic governance. It is about giving meaning to democracy that delivers on the promises that our politicians are making. The other thing that I want to focus on, which hasn't come out yet, but it's got to do with just before I go there, I just want to mention on education. The problem with the education system is that we are delivering too many administrators, artists, linguists, etc. We're not delivering the type of skills that the business community needs. Industrial needs engineers. It needs scientists. We need financial accountants, etc. We're not delivering those in the numbers we should be delivering. So we need to rethink the way that, or the curriculum of the education system. The other area that worries me is social cohesion in the country, and we will be releasing tomorrow our South African Social Cohesion Index, and what the social cohesion shows us is that generally speaking, South Africa, out of a score of 100, scores 53.2%, I think it is, 53.2%, which is in the same sort of line as what Germany, for example, does deliver. But that is not a true picture, because within that the indicators, the social cohesion indicators, issues such as, and all of this has been addressed in the presentations to now, is that the perception of fairness is extremely low. It's here in the low 30s. The respect for the rules in the country, extremely low. And the trust in our institutions to deliver it, extremely low. So if we do not build social cohesion in this country, it will not underpin a growing economy. And any economy with wonky social cohesion will not grow. And therefore, we need to give more focus to building social cohesion in this country as well. I think that is the 3 points that I'd like to make at this point. And then just on, Mike, your issue on why does the academic intelligentsia message not filter through to the man in the street, is maybe because our language is wrong. Maybe we talk at far too high a level. Maybe we should start talking in parables and make it easily digestible and understanding to the man in the street. Something that Professor Pali has very adequately done with making figures talk. I think let's leave it at that point, at that point for now, and we can add later.
Thank you, Mr. Swanepoel, for your inputs. I think that you are finishing on a point that touches on social cohesion, and that tempts me to migrate towards Theuns because of his broad interactions and involvement in matters relating to where the country should go in the construction of the country, trying to and dealing with the challenges of nation building, basically, and social cohesion. I think the thing that I did not mention as well, which will explain why I'm saying I'm tempted to gravitate towards Theuns as our next speaker, is that Theuns has been involved with with issues in the Afrikaans community at various levels, and I think that he has got a perspective of one part of the society that many of us might not have. So when we talk about social cohesion and nation building, I think that he would probably be the best place to start at on the thing.